If you've ever said the words, "I'm part Viking," sit down. Because in 2020, scientists cracked open the largest genetic study of Viking skeletons ever done, and what they found didn't just complicate the Viking story. It quietly ended it. The blonde, blue-eyed, purely Scandinavian raider you picture, he may never have existed. And the people who built entire identities, tourism industries, and even political movements on that image are not happy this got published. For 2 centuries, the story was simple. Vikings were Scandinavian, full stop. Norwegian, Swedish, Danish farmers turned raiders who terrorized Europe between roughly 750 and 1050 AD, then sailed home to their fjords with the loot. It's in the textbooks, it's in the TV shows. It's tattooed on people's arms in runic script. That story is exactly what a team led by geneticist Eske Willerslev at the University of Cambridge set out to test, not by guessing, not by reading sagas, but by sequencing DNA from 442 Viking Age human skeletons pulled from burial sites across Europe and Greenland. The first result alone should have been a headline. A significant share of the people buried as Vikings, with Viking weapons in Viking ritual style, had genetic ancestry that traced back to southern Europe and Asia, not Scandinavia at all. Some Viking skeletons in Scotland were genetically almost entirely local Pictish people, who had simply adopted Viking identity, style, and burial customs. In other words, being a Viking was never strictly about blood. It was closer to a culture or even a career that people could opt into. A poor farmer's son from Ireland could become a Viking, the same way someone today might become a biker through community, symbols, and shared activity, not ancestry. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. This study wasn't commissioned by people hoping to dismantle Viking identity. Several of the institutions and museums that helped fund Viking Age research over the decades had built their entire public image and ticket sales around the pure, blood Scandinavian warrior. A genuinely mixed, multicultural Viking world was not the finding anyone was rooting for. When Willeslev's team mapped the genetic ancestry of these skeletons, the pattern that emerged looked nothing like a single Viking bloodline spreading outward. It looked like a web. Genetic influence flowing into Scandinavia from the British Isles and southern Europe, and flowing back out again centuries before anyone assumes large-scale migration was possible. This is the part that earns the title of this video. National identity movements across Scandinavia and white nationalist groups worldwide spent decades pointing to pure Viking blood as proof of a distinct, unmixed Nordic lineage. The genetic evidence flatly does not support that. Willerslev himself put it plainly to the press. The results show Vikings were far more genetically diverse than commonly perceived, and that Scandinavian identity is not fixed but constantly changing. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for more than one country. The Viking study is just one entry in a much bigger pattern. In Britain, ancient DNA overturned the belief that Anglo-Saxons violently replaced the native population. The genetic record instead shows centuries of ongoing mixing. In Japan, a 2026 genome study identified a previously unrecognized third ancestral population, undercutting the long-taught dual origin story that most Japanese textbooks still repeat. Every time, the pattern is identical. A tidy national origin story gets taught for generations. Then the DNA comes back, and the tidy story turns out to be a simplification, sometimes a convenient one. It's worth asking why these myths survive so long after the evidence changes. Tourism boards sell authentic Viking heritage tours. Ancestry testing companies sell "Find out if you're really a Viking" kits. Political movements use ethnic purity claims to justify exclusion. A messy, mixed human truth doesn't sell merchandise or votes nearly as well as a clean bloodline story does. Predictably, when the study published, it did not go unchallenged. Some critics argued the sample sizes for certain regions were too small to generalize. Others accused the researchers of political motivation. Willerslev team stood by the data. This was, after all, the single largest ancient DNA survey of the Viking Age ever assembled, published in Nature, one of the most rigorously peer-reviewed journals on Earth. So maybe that's the takeaway. The Vikings were more diverse than the movies ever showed us. A good story to tell at dinner. Case closed, except it isn't. Because here's what almost nobody says out loud. This isn't just a story about the year 900. It's a story about right now. Millions of people have taken consumer ancestry tests and built parts of their identity around a percentage on a screen, 23% Scandinavian. You're a Viking after all. But population genetics doesn't work in neat percentages tied to modern ethnic labels. It works in overlapping, blended histories that rarely map cleanly onto the countries or ethnic categories we use today. The uncomfortable truth is this: almost every pure ancestry story anyone tells about themselves is, at some level, a simplification of something far messier and far more interesting. The Vikings didn't have a pure bloodline. Statistically, neither do you. So, the next time someone tells you they're pure anything, Viking, Roman, whatever the label, you'll know the DNA almost never agrees. History wasn't made of bloodlines. It was made of people moving, mixing, and reinventing who they said they were. Maybe that's a less flattering story than the one on the tattoo. But it's the true one, if this kind of story where the science quietly rewrites the myth is what you're here for. Subscribe, because this channel exists to keep finding the ones nobody wants to admit.